Hello and welcome to the Gormery and You. This is part of an ongoing series of deep dives into various aspects of the board game Kingdom Death Monster. My name is Fen, and today we are continuing to take a look at the Gorm, which is a phenomenal expansion that, according to Adam, was designed entirely by Arne Poots, and I do have to say that, with the exception of just a couple of small things, this expansion is a slam dunk knockout of the park. Absolutely phenomenal. You're going to see very few complaints and criticisms on this stuff, and anything that I do have an issue with tends to just be a case of the numbers only need a little bit of adjusting. But for the most part, we're not here to criticise this, we are here to take a good look at it all. And actually, before I get into the gear itself, we're going to talk about the resources, which I don't usually do, but I would quite like to here, because I think the Gorm is super interesting on the resource front, and it does add some extra decisions that you need to be making. First of all, on the left side here, we have multiple strange resources. All of these do not normally drop from any old average Gorm. The active thyroid comes from a single critical wound on a single hit location. The pure bulb comes from a single death blow, and additionally that death blow is going to cause blindness, so you want to, if it's good to have dried acanthus or the healing potion from the Gorm chemist to help protect against that blind, because if you get a chance to get this pure bulb, take it. Even if it is going to cost the survivor the sight in one eye, still take it. We'll explain why. Gormite, we've discussed a little bit previously, but it also appears when fighting the level 3 Gorm. And the stomach lining is a level 3 Gorm specific drop. Both of these are used in crafting really good pieces of gear. So we'll discuss the gear when we get to those various bits and pieces, but it's just worth knowing where you get them from. This you'll get from the Gorm chemist or the level 3 Gorm. This exclusively from the level 3 Gorm. Okay, as for the rest of the resources, here they all are. They are in order of how common they are in the deck. So it's 4, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1. The Gorm brain we talked about in the previous video on the Gorm chemist, so we're not going to worry about that here. It's not used for anything here. You should be using it exclusively for that special innovate that I talked about. But I wanted to just lay everything out so you can see the rarities of things, because if you get an acid gland, or you get a milky eye, or you get a stout vertebrae, or a handed skull, or a dense bone, you need to be thinking about what you want to be using these on. The rarer resources, and as we can see there are a number in here, if they allow you to build really good pieces of gear, they're more valuable. Also, as always, knowing how many slots go towards helping build the armor set is a big thing, and stout hide is used in the armor set. There are 4. There's actually only 4 pieces like there in the deck, and you need 6 to complete the armor set, so it's at least 2 Gorms, and that's if you were incredibly lucky. Mammoth hands, this is one of the things I really want to highlight are these 3. They're multiple resources in one thing, so bone organ, and organ hide. Really good once you've crafted the relevant weaponry or gear cards that come from them. So that's all of the resource section. We muddled through that. And before we get into the rest of the gear, I do briefly want to talk about the Gorment armor in advance of the whole set, because Gorment armor is a little bit unique and unusual. It's got a design I would love to see more of, in that it has 2 configurations. The first is this section here in the white, so ignoring this and ignoring this, you'll see that these 4 pieces of gear, they actually cover all 5 hit locations. More on that in a little bit. But they give you this first ability, which adds 1 armor to all hit locations, and when you suffer more than 1 severe injury from attack, you get to ignore the second severe injury. only the second severe injury, so plan accordingly how you're going to have those be rolled for in order to handle that. But when you have this gear card here, the Regeneration suit, which comes exclusively from fighting the level 3 Gorm, you actually get to instead have +2 armor to all hit locations, and whenever you suffer more than one severe injury from attack, you get to ignore all severe injuries after the first one. And this feeds into one of the themes of Gorment armor, which is regeneration. And Gorment armor is essentially at its uttermost peak. It is trying to ignore the relevance of armor points and instead take a ton of hits and be like, I don't care about these injuries because I'm only going to take one of them, and I'm even going to heal that at the end of the showdown, which we'll look at that when we look at the Regeneration suit. It's a super unique piece of armor. It has an unusual stat profile when it's completely built up, and it's one of the few self-upgrading armor sets. As such, I think it is a super cool piece of design, and I really like what it's doing, and I like how it scales at least into the mid-game and the early parts of the late game, and I greatly appreciate the playstyle it has, even though it is kind of a high-risk playstyle. You'll certainly want to invest in a life elixir if you're looking to lean properly into being a survivor who has both of their arms and legs cut off during a showdown and bites the monster to death before regenerating everything at the end of the showdown. Goodness knows what kind of trauma that would inflict on a person to experience that when they're fighting, but it is certainly unique. Okay, that's all of the little bits of preamble. Oh yeah, the active thyroid has this consumability. It's a 40% chance of +1 speed, otherwise it's death. You probably don't bother consuming this. Likewise, stout kidney, you wouldn't really consume this either. It's not really worth consuming resources for temporary bonuses like this. But, they're there. Your opinion may differ. So, let's get into the gear. We're going to start by looking at the armor set. And here is the base armor set. So this is all 4 pieces that make up the first version of the armor set. Every Gorm piece provides 2 armor points, so the full set will be 3 on each location. They have the armor and set keywords as standard. They have the Gorm skin keyword, which doesn't have too much going on for it right now, but may in the future, especially if we get some Gorm skin outfit pieces. And they all have the heavy keyword. Obviously, heavy is a little bit of a negative. We've discussed that before in the past, so the usual concerns apply, and the best things to do to handle heavy is to play with survival of the fittest as your principle, so at least they have their lifetime reroll to try and avoid dying if that happens, and also to take whips on the hunt, have a whip available to help them in other situations where the heavy keyword may cause issues. Otherwise, heavy's just, you live with it, it's not worth avoiding it if the juice is worth the squeeze, and in Gorment armor I kind of think it is. So the second unique thing about Gorment armor is slot compression. This is very rare in Kingdom Death. Armor sets usually take up 5 out of your 9 slots. Add into that the need for a weapon and sometimes a shield, and suddenly you've got very little room left to actually do anything unique outside of what the armor set's doing. So that helps, because suddenly the armor set here takes up less than half of the gear grid. Now, one playstyle you can use this for is you can run, if you have a lot of expansions, a bow and multiple arrows and have full Gorment armor. Or you can run full Gorment armor and a weapon and then have a load of support gear. So the Gorment armor's 4-slot thing does have relevance. However, the other option is to lean into what Gorment armor is actually looking to do, which is it's looking to provide you immunity to intimidate actions, to let you do a really kind of cool shield-based monster movement trick, and that aforementioned regeneration of severe injuries at the end of a showdown, or taking less severe injuries on the 4-slot version we have here. So we're going to start by looking at the Gorment mask, which is over here on the left. This has an up blue and a down green. You do want to get these connected in order to activate its ability. It's worth noting, generally with the down green, you'll either activate this with the Regeneration suit, or you will activate this with a leather shield because of Gorment's inbuilt leather like synergy, shield synergy, I should say. The top piece, down facing blues are quite rare. Fortunately, we have 2 options within the Gormery, so we can get that sorted by just hunting the Gorm. I'll talk about those a bit later and their positives and negatives, as currently there is a right choice, but I imagine once an FAQ finally gets issued or we get Campaigns of Death, that's going to change. So, Gorment Mask's ability is, with that blue and green connected, if your courage is higher than monster level, ignore intimidate actions. This is absolutely huge. There's nothing that comes close to this on most helmets. This is just about the best helmet ability and one of the best armor abilities in the entire game. This is better than earplugs that comes with the lantern armor, because heck, this doesn't make you deaf, so you don't have the negatives of being deaf. You just get to no-sell when you're trying to be intimidated by the monster. It roars in your face, rears up and looks absolutely terrifying, or threatens to murder you, and you just laugh from the inside of your elephant-skinned, baby-faced alchemy gimp mask, because you don't care anymore. It's superb, and this piece of gear here, I just wish Gorment had higher armor points overall, because it's so good that I would love to be able to use it in mixed sets and bring it into the late game. I'm also really hoping that we see it in some hybrid sets in Campaigns of Death. It's one of my favourite pieces of gear. The negative is, as I'm sure you can tell, you need 3 pieces of gear in a column. So it is very restrictive on what you can do, because you only have a 2x3 remaining area to put everything else in. So you can't do any triple line pieces unless you have affinity gear cards that manage to hinge, because they have like a down facing blue and there's something on the left or right that provides another affinity. It's restrictive. It's worth the price. Okay, next thing, we're just going to talk about the Gorment sleeves and the suit together, because this is a set. Okay, the only reason you wouldn't have both of these in the same gear grid is because you haven't been able to craft one of them yet, and the Gorment sleeves do absolutely nothing without the Gorment suit anyway. So let's look at the Gorment suit. It has the ability Guard. This is Gorment's monster movement. That's the term I use for these, where you kind of duplicate a monster ability. In the case of the Gorment suit's Guard, you're kind of copying the Wretch move from the Gorm, where it bounces backwards a few steps. So I think it's kind of cool that that's what it's doing, but more than that, it's providing you with this interesting form of protection. So at the end of your attack, if you're standing and you have a shield in your gear grid, you can spend 1 survival to move 3 spaces directly away from the monster and get block 1 for free. Gorment sleeves with 2 green affinities, one of which will come from the Gorment suit, upgrades that so you can guard without spending survival. Now, the tricky part of Guard is that it needs a blue affinity, a green puzzle affinity, which comes from the sleeves, as you can see right here, and a red affinity. Gorment armor doesn't give you any red affinities, so suddenly you need to put together a entire red affinity from your other gear. And you can see that the Gorment sleeves and suit, they sit together in this kind of connection, which means suddenly now you've only got a 2x2 space to fit everything else in. So your weapon generally needs to contribute towards the red affinity in order for it to be pretty good. Additionally, you only get block 1 with this ability, and you do move away from the monster. Now you can restrict the moving away from the monster by having something behind you like another survivor, and you'll bump into them and you'll stop moving because you have to move directly away. So, you know, you can move back one space, boom, and get trapped. The really neat part is this will work with two-handed weapons. So this is technically a version of blood paint in an armor piece that works with two-handed weapons and ranged weapons, because it's the end of your attack. It doesn't care if your weapon was melee or ranged, and all you need is that shield in your gear grid. There's a shield in the Gormery that we'll get to. There's also the round leather shield, which is super good for how Gorment armor is laid out, and definitely both the Knuckle Shield from the Gormery and the round leather shield were thought about in respects to the design of the Gorment armor and Gorment suitability and guard and everything. So this is one of the few criticisms I have, is I wish that this block 1 was said activate a shield in your gear grid for free, or block X, or something to let it scale, however that would be worded, because this doesn't work with block 2 on the beacon shield, this doesn't work with deflect or anything like that, and block 1 falls off when you start getting to the higher level monsters and their speed climbs up to like +2 tokens. Our last piece of gear for the 4-piece Gorment armor is the least impressive piece. It's the Gorment boots. They have 0 affinities, which that's another big negative, is they don't even contribute a red affinity, which often footwear contributes red affinities. That doesn't happen here. And the ability is other survivors may move through but not end movement in a space you occupy. That is a situational but pretty powerful ability. Normally it takes 4 movement to walk right round a survivor, or 3 just to get to the other side of one. This changes it, so if somebody wants to pass through you, it takes them 2 steps. And it allows for a lot of flexibility, as long as you remember it exists. So it is a cool ability. I like it, but the boots, they're suddenly eating one of those 4 slots that you've got to try and arrange things to get your red affinity in play. And so you're kind of getting very restricted because they don't contribute any sort of red affinity at all to the situation. They don't even provide a green or a blue affinity that might help elsewhere. So that's another negative with Gorment armor, is suddenly now we're down to 3 spaces, only 2 of which can connect to each other to get our red affinity. So that's the 4 set. We expand to a 5-piece gear with the Regeneration suit. Alright, and this, it requires a jiggling lard and the stomach lining. We'll talk about the whole costs of the Gorment set right after we finish talking about the Regeneration suit. Okay, so the Regeneration suit is a little unusual in that it is another body piece for the Gorm suit. And for the Gorment armor, and it sits on top of the Gorment suit, and it can do that because it is an accessory rather than a piece of armor, so it works. It's also a little odd in that its keywords are item and Gorm instead of, I think it's supposed to be Gorm skin, but kind of the implication here is the Regeneration suit is you're wearing a Gorm, which tickles me. I know what they mean, but it is kind of funny to be like, hey, check it out, my survivor's persona is a Gorm. Yeah. The ability on this ties into all of these green affinities you see on it. As long as you have one of them connected and at least 2 other green affinities in your gear grid, then at the end of the showdown you remove any permanent injuries you suffered this showdown, which is why I talked about how Gorment armor is kind of focused around this, not worrying too much about severe injuries, and as a consequence worrying less about your armor points, because once they're gone and you're taking severe injuries, you take a lot less severe injuries than anyone else, and as long as you don't die, then heck, you can come back, and wonderful. A little counter to this is the Regeneration suit does add more armor points onto your body, but that's actually not to be worried about, because one of the things I've not ever really talked about in too much detail is when you're trying to work out how effective a piece of armour is, for body protection, you actually want to consider it as being half the number of armour points, because it's twice as likely to be hit, because of the location dice is head, body, arms, waist, legs. So getting more armour points onto the body here isn't really a big deal, because it's effectively, quote unquote, 3 armour points, or if you prefer it, 6 armour points split between 2 different results on the hit location dice. The other really sweet thing about the Regeneration suit is it can go into any build because it's an accessory. And there's actually a group of armourless survivor build styles that love having green affinities that will use the Regeneration suit. These include crystalline skin survivors, who are one of my favourite survivor types. They can't wear armour, but they get a really sweet benefit of having 2 armour points to all locations. However, they're more likely to take worse severe injuries because they're made out of crystal now. They can wear Regeneration suits though. They can also use shields, so you can bolster your armour points in a few different ways. We also have the Acanthus Doctor, which is going to get its own video. It's a Flower Knight secret fighting art, and it's still arguably one of the most powerful survivor archetypes in the entire game. Very, very strong, a lot of fun to play actually, and relatively easy and reliable to unlock as long as you know what you're doing. So the Regeneration suit has way more applications than just being a part of Gorment armour, which I do think is very interesting. Crafting Gorment armour though, this isn't cheap. Our base set is a stout hide and a handed skull for the mask, a stout hide and a bone for the sleeves, 3 stout hide and a stout kidney for the suit, which makes sense because it's actually technically 2 gear cards combined into one, and a stout hide and a bone for the boots. That is 10 resources, and 6 of those need to be stout hide. So my general position on this is the armour points are a little low for what you pay, but given what the Gorment suit is trying to do, it's understandable. But I'm not the biggest fan of it, because a 3-3-3-3-3, like all 3's armour set, just it's hard to justify it existing when leather costs 9 resources and part of an endeavour, and is just like, it has 4s across the board and a bunch of really good abilities and affinities. So a little awkward spot, but this is a common one for Node 1 and 2 monsters to be sat in, where it's like, oh, they're not quite as good as they kind of need to be. But the benefits with Gorment may outweigh those negatives. The Regeneration suit costs a stomach lining and a jiggling lard, so essentially it only really costs 1 resource because you get the stomach lining from killing a level 3 Gorm, so unless you're making green armour, where the stomach lining is also used, you're going in for the express purpose of getting this Regeneration suit, and you get it very cheaply, so it's pretty fantastic. That's the Gorment armour as a whole. It is a 4-slot armour set that actually requires a lot of specific cards, so it's way more restrictive than it looks, but you can also just ignore the synergies it has and use it for archers or for support survivors, and just be like, hey, it's only 4 slots and I'm really happy with that, and I still get the set bonus, which is nice. So now we're going to start walking through the remaining 10 cards. And let me just say, this includes some absolute all-stars. There's some of the best stuff in the entire early game, and even the entire game, that is sitting in these cards. It's incredibly good. But we start with the Gorn and Armour Spikes. I'm going to put both of these up at the same time because they kind of have the same function. Now, first of all, I have a particular position when it comes to rules. So if something is put into print, it is put on the FAQ or on the online glossary. As far as I'm concerned, that's canon, okay? That is absolutely, and I will follow that. If it comes in an email or via a tweet or via a message on Discord, I'm not considering it when I talk about these videos, because I tried doing that in the past and it is exhausting trying to keep up with it. Team Death have an official channel on their website for updates. It looks like they're going to start using those more, so until that happens, I am perfectly aware that the Dark Taste Master said that the Gorn is supposed to have noisy. It doesn't have noisy printed on there. If you want to follow Dark Taste Master's ruling on that already in advance, that's fine. But I'm not going to make that assessment based on this. I'm going to make it based on the card that they've put into the KDM simulator here at the time of recording, and it doesn't have noisy. So the Gorn is really good because it is the only instrument in the game without noisy at the moment, and that has synergy with a bunch of instrument related things. Additionally, it has a really rare affinity, the downward facing blue, that normally comes on helmets and not on many other things, and it has a situationally decent ability. You can activate it and all non-death knockdown survivors stand, and they gain +1 armor to all hit locations, and you can use this once per showdown. So this has a lot of potential to help all of the other survivors stand up. It also helps White Line armor get access to its blue affinity. It helps Gorment armor get access to its blue affinity. It's really fantastic. It is very expensive. It costs 1 stout heart and 3 bone. So it's a pricey piece of gear to make, but it is really good. Now, obviously, when it gets errata to have noisy, use it in showdowns and just ignore this existence otherwise, because noisy just isn't worth the heartache. And instead, we can take the armor spikes. So if this is the alternative, it has interesting synergy with the Gorment armor, because if adjacent to the monster when you suffer a severe body injury, the monster suffers a wound, limit once per round. Automatic wounds that bypass the hit location deck are one of Kingdom Death's unicorns. These are amazing, and usually they have a fairly high price to them, and this gear card does have a fairly high price to it, on respect that you need to take a severe body injury. And as we discussed, you actually get 6 armor points to the body when you've got a fully upgraded set, but if you can regenerate those severe body injuries, or you can ignore them through Dried Acanthus, you're still suffering it, the monster still suffers the wound, and then you get to either heal it back at the end of the showdown or cancel it out, which is pretty great. Additionally, it has the bone keyword, which is sweet. The heavy keyword I don't think particularly matters, because both of the armor sets I will use this on already have the heavy keyword, so that is whatever it is what it is. But given that this costs a stout vertebrae and a scrap to make, and the stout vertebrae has no other uses beyond being a generic bone, I'm almost always going to craft a set of armor spikes for a Gorment armor set if I'm not using the Gorn. So this is the other option. It's just a direct replacement. It's absolutely fine. It's not amazing, but it does have synergies, and it does have this really important affinity that is otherwise very hard to get in the early game. Alright, next up we have the Knuckle Shield. This costs 1 mammoth hand and 2 bone, so it's not cheap, but this is a shield you can craft in Lantern Year 1. And in addition to that, it's a very offensively statted shield with 3 speed, 7+ accuracy and 1 strength. And it has block 1, so you can just use block normally. And once per round, if you wound with this weapon, you block 1 for free. Plus it has this lovely down red affinity, which will combine with the Pulse Lantern, as we see just right next to it, or even better with the Steadfast Potion from the Gorm Chemist that gradually scales up your strength for every block you make. Still, you know, I would prefer this on a survivor with a few extra points of strength, like a +2 or +3 strength survivor, a bit of a beefcake. Same situation with normal shield leveling. The more strength you have, the easier it is to do. And same with daggers. But this is just such a great weapon. And I really want to highlight a couple of important things, is that if you get this online before the Butcher, it is a huge help to just sit there and cancel one of the Butcher's attacks, because the Butcher's fairly inaccurate. It's also really good against the level 1 Screaming Antelope because that thing does a lot of 1 dice attacks and the Knuckle Shield just completely negates them. So this is a premium piece of gear that has synergy with Gorment armor, but is also just super powerful and really great. And it will get you going on your shield proficiency far faster and far more effectively than the leather shield can. So this is an all-time classic. Now we have the Pulse Lantern. This is a support card lantern. It costs the Milky Eye and the Active Thyroid. So Milky Eye, there's only one in the deck. Active Thyroid needs that specific crit, so this is fairly hard to make. It has the Lantern keyword, which has some synergy in People of the Lantern that I won't go into here. It's also fragile, so it can break under certain circumstances. You just have to live with that if it happens. And it has this nice up-facing red affinity, so as mentioned before, it can combine with the Knuckle Shield as one of the options to get your red affinity for Gorman armor. Its ability is super unique and very powerful. You can activate it, and once per showdown, roll a d10. On the result of 4+, the monster is knocked down, and then all survivors get a -1 accuracy token. So, -1 accuracy, not great. But knocked down monsters are always hit on a 3+, so when you activate this, that doesn't matter. Additionally, you can surge to activate this during the flow step and cause a monster to fall over. So one of the things you'll do against level 1 and level 2 monsters with this is near the end of the showdown, it will activate and rush, plan to rush in and maul some poor survivor who's really tired and worn out and their armor's busted, and you'll flash it with the Pulse Lantern. The monster falls over, and then everybody leaps in and just starts kicking it like Bucciarati's gang does in Golden Wind, which is just a delight. And if the monster has low enough wounds left that you can get through it before it gets back to its feet, that is super effective. Against the Indomitable monsters, that's the level 3s and higher, this only gives the first person attacking the knocked down accuracy bonuses. Everybody else is just going to have to deal with the fact that the monster's back on its feet and they have less accuracy. Hopefully you've got more accuracy to compensate for that, but you can still use it to cancel a very dangerous attack, or you can use it again near the end of the showdown to just try and secure those last couple of wounds in a safer fashion. It's great, and when you do get the resources to craft it, I do think it is worth crafting, especially because it also provides a useful affinity even if it's not doing anything else, and it has the aforementioned Lantern keyword. Okay, Acid Tooth Dagger. This weapon, which costs an acid gland and 2 bone, so kind of hard to make, is one of my favourite weapons in the game. It's also my favourite paired weapon in the entire game, and one of the few weapons I think actually works correctly as a paired weapon. So this is a melee dagger with the bone keyword. Always nice to get bone synergy stuff. It has a 2/7+2 attack profile, which is not great, and it has paired, so it means you can have a second acid tooth dagger to get it up to 4 speed, which is decent. But the big thing is, on a perfect hit, a wound attempt in your attack automatically succeeds. As I mentioned before with the spikes, automatic wounds are unicorns. This is a slightly less powerful version of the automatic wound. You do still have to draw a card from the hit location deck for the hit, so you're still vulnerable to reactions and drawing the trap, and you don't get to do critical wounds, but boom, you just get to bypass the monster's toughness and get straight in there, and every single perfect hit you get gives you another automatic wound, which is very, very powerful. And this dagger just does wonders, especially if you can get Timeless Eye onto a survivor and anything else that helps increase the perfect hit range. There's some dagger specific synergies that can do that. Additionally, if you have the Sunstalk in the campaign, that will help you scale these daggers even further on, and I do that. I straight up use Acid Tooth daggers with Cycloid scale armor. I think it's really good. This gets you on daggers early, this helps you get daggers leveled up, and it is just a great weapon, and White Lion armor really likes it, so that's another nice additional bonus. Next up we have the Gaxe. This costs a dense bone and a stout hide, and it's one of 2 axes in the Gormery. It has 1 6+4 for its attack profile, and when you have at least 1 red affinity in your gear grid, it gets +1 speed and savage. Additionally, the first time you critically wound the monster, it gets a -1 evasion token. So it's a decent package. The trouble is, it's sharing its crafting cost with the armor set and with the greater Gaxe, and there's kind of an anything you can do, I can do better situation, which involves the greater Gaxe, that leaves the Gaxe struggling to find a spot in its builds. Because generally, anything you could do with the Gaxe outside of this -1 evasion token, which is good, that's +1 accuracy to all survivors, outside of that, the greater Gaxe is just better in all other situations, and it's a little bit of a shame. This is because Savage is kind of, without Deadly, Savage is sort of something you don't have a lot of control over happening. It's nice because it is an additional automatic wound, but usually if you've got a survivor with decent luck, you don't leverage Savage, you leverage Deadly to increase the chances of getting the critical wound in the first place. So that's the thing. Now, worth noting, an Axe Master does get automatic critical wounds against persistent hit locations, but this doesn't really have the stats to be wielded by a Axe Master, because Axe Masters happen near later stages of the campaign. So I love the Gaxe, I love the design of the Gaxe, but I don't really use it because its bigger, better version is in the same crafting location and is sharing 50% of the same resources and doesn't require Gorm and armor specific resources to craft, so it's hard to justify making the Gaxe. So let's get on to it. The Greater Gaxe, or the GGX, is one of the best early game weapons out there. It is pretty much that meme with the survivor walking down the road, holding hands with the Gaxe, and then looking over his shoulder at the Greater Gaxe and going, ooh, because this is a sexy weapon. Design-wise, I think visually it's not great. The Gaxe is a nicer design overall, but the Greater Gaxe just wins on every other category. It's got 2 6+4 for its attack profile, so it has that +1 speed automatically built into it and the same strength. It has Deadly and it has Reach too, and I've talked about how good Reach is and how well Reach works with monster movement abilities like the White Lion or the Phoenix and so on. It additionally has Barbed 4, which is on a perfect hit. You get +4 strength for the rest of the attack as long as you've got a green and a red affinity anywhere in your gear grid, and the Greater Gaxe is offering you with a left facing red affinity to boot. This is one of the Gorm's Lion Beast guitars. This thing wrecks the Butcher. It is just phenomenal, and it only costs a dense bone and a jiggling lard, which is a great price to pay. If you get them early on fighting the Gorm and they pop out, you're going to make this. It is just an all-time classic. It is definitely one of the best early game weapons. It's not one of the best weapons in, well, it's one of the best weapons in the Gormery, but it's not top 3 because unfortunately the top 3 are absolute all-stars. And let's go take a look at them, shall we? First of all, we have the weakest of the 3. Yeah, that's right, the weakest, which is the Rib Blade. This costs a meaty rib and a hide. So there's 2 meaty ribs in the Gorm. If you draw one and it's early game, you're going to be making this. It's got an attack profile of 1 6+5, and it's slow and deadly. It's also a grand weapon with the bone keyword. Oh, sorry. Greater Gaxe's two-handed nature and heavy is a negative. Do need to acknowledge those. Did forget the keywords. They do matter. But for the most part, at least in the early game, two-handed isn't a big deal, and heavy you just live with. Back to your previously scheduled Rib Blade program. So this is an amazing weapon. Grand weapons are great anyway. They get a fantastic early game specialization that gives them more accuracy and can cause knockdowns. Rib Blade leans into everything grand weapons are looking to do. On top of that, it's bone. It has a right facing affinity, and it is one-handed. It is one of the only one-handed grand weapons in the game, which means it works with blood paint if you want to use it that way, which is just bonkers. It's such a good weapon. On top of all of that, because it is slow, it has perfect synergy with the Gorm Chemist's Wisdom Potion. And the only thing that it's a little bit behind on is its affinity doesn't face the right direction to connect to the Wisdom Potion. But hey, it connects to a Lucky Charm, so we'll take that. And that's absolutely fine. Okay. The hits keep on coming and they just get stronger and stronger because say hello to the Riot Mace. One of the top weapons in the game at every single aspect of the campaign. This is a prestige weapon. It requires the pure bulb, a stout kidney, a jiggling lard and a dense bone to make it, so it is very expensive and you need to death blow a Gorm in order to get the pure bulb in the first place. So not something you will achieve every showdown fight and can require a little bit of hit location manipulation and scouting to get that lined up. But this weapon, which again is technically craftable in Lantern Year 1, is just bonkers good. It has 2 speed, 5+ accuracy, which you don't see that too often on weapons with 2 speed, especially not ones craftable potentially this early. 5 strength, so the same strength as the Rib Blade, and deadly, and it's got a blue affinity to connect to a Lucky Charm. And it's a club, which means that it scales with Lantern Armour into the end game, because Lantern Armour will give it more accuracy and sharp. On top of all of that, when you critically wound, the next time the monster would draw an AI card, it draws a basic action instead. There are so many monsters that do not want to be jammed onto their basic actions because they end up being really ineffective. Not all monsters, some monsters have terrifying basic actions that are quite a concern, but other ones have just really bad ones, or they're ones that are just way weaker than anything they could pull out of their AI deck. Locking monsters away from their AI cards and into their basic cards means they are predictable and they're generally weaker. This is amazing. This is everything you want in a weapon. About the only criticism you could give is that it doesn't have bonkers high strength, but the fact that it still gets sharp via Lantern Armour makes up a lot for that and means it can hang with many of the blacksmith weapons. It's amazing. Even club is like a decent weapon type just without thinking about Lantern Armour, so leveling up club is wonderful. Just lights out, amazing. I love it. And if you get a chance to craft one, just craft it and you'll use it for most of the campaign unless you get bored with it. Great stuff. Okay, our final piece of gear before we get to the builds is again one of the best weapons in the entire game. This is another prestige weapon. It requires Gormite, which you can get via the innovating of transmutation at the Gorm Chemist, or sometimes fight in the level 3 Gorm. It is a weapon, melee, sword, and heavy. So swords are weapon types that get better the later into the game you get. The Black Sword does that and then some more. So first of all, it has a 3 speed, 5+ accuracy, 10 strength base weapon profile. Very, very good. And then on a perfect hit, you gain +1 survival, which is nice. Always happy to get that. It's a good bonus. But also, if you are a sword master, You understand this weapon's potential and it gains plus 20 strength, pushing it to 30 strength. 30 strength matches the 30 toughness that the toughest monster in the game right now, the level 3 hand, has. The hand caps out at 30 toughness. This thing wounds the hand 50% of the time without any extra strength from the survivor, and that's without taking into account the bonuses you get from being a swordmaster, which adds even more stats to the sword. It's just amazing. It's a real journey to get there, and it is very, very powerful. There is, of course, a little bit of controversy around the Black Sword and how it interacts with promo gear, Vagabond armor. I'm not going to go into that here, in part because I don't really use those synergies. It's a little too good, and I like the reward of grinding sword to get it to mastery and having that sweet survivor ready to go out and rock the world of the final nemesis. It feels very thematic to me. So lights out, amazing weapon, a delight to use, and it's fun to have weapons that unlock an extra ability in the hands of a master. Really sweet concept. Okay, so time for us to take a look at some builds. We've got 4 builds that we're going to go and have a little gander at. They do include a number of little different options. To start with, here is a look at our Gorment armor, so we can see a typical layout and see the kind of limitations and issues that occur. I do actually have a number of different sort of flex options in here. This isn't a specific build. This is more of, hey, this is what the layout's like, have a think about and look for various bits and pieces. So first of all, if you're not using the Gorm, you can have the armor spikes there. Secondly, you can run a Steadfast Potion Knuckle Shield if you want. You can run a Pulse Lantern with a Knuckle Shield. You can have the Zambato in there as well. These are all options, absolutely fine. You can also have the counterweighted axe can fit into this package. Down-facing reds are a little harder to find, but you will have access to some that are at least okay. If you're running the Zambato, you can do this as a gear grid with whatever downward-facing red you want here, and then now, hey, we've got a fairly decent selection, and we got our evasion, so this is kind of an okay-ish tank. And of course, if you're upgrading further, then you can run the regeneration suit in this slot, and you can rearrange things a little bit, so you could have a Zambato fit in there like so, and you still have these in here, and that all works. Obviously I prefer a better gear card here than the Knuckle Shield, but it does synergize, and there's not many other red affinity shields that are gonna do the work, so it's okay. But this is a good example of why Gorment armor is a little awkward to build, because you're kind of very locked into where you can put things, and Gorment boots are quite an issue in choking up this gear grid, on top of the Gorment mask and the sleeves and suit being so demanding in how they like to have their layout. Okay, next one, I think you've seen this before, so I just wanted to repeat it. This is how Gorment gear can help White Lion armor do its thing. As we can see, Acid Tooth Dagger here, Acid Tooth Dagger here. We got Gorn or armor spikes to sort out the White Lion coat, to get the White Lion helm online, to give you that little bit of flexibility if needed. And of course, daggers have synergy with the set bonus and everything, and they like extra speed. So fantastic. Strap Timeless Eye onto this and take it to the bank. It's fun, it's nice to have something, and we even got a slot spare there to put a shield in to try and help White Lion armor last a bit longer in the campaign. Next up, this is your standard Wisdom Potion. Deadly Crit Farmer, we've seen this build before. I just wanted to highlight that now we can run the Wisdom Potion here. Combined with the Lucky Charm, we can have the Greater Gaxe, we can have the Rib Blade, we can have the Riot Mace, all these different options. It's a very standard cookie cutter build, but again, if you're just playing with the Gorm and you don't have the White Lion, this is a nice staple just to build and put out so you can support your other survivors. It does gangbusters, it does work. I think this is the overall most synergist version of it, but obviously the Riot Mace is just too good to pass up on. Last of all, here's a look at a green affinity build using the power potion. The power potion I talked about in the Gorm Chemist, and I said I'd get to a build for it. There's loads of other builds, but I wanted to highlight here how you can use the power potion to make a kind of suboptimal piece of gear do some real work. So the Whistling Mace and the Skullcap Hammer both have interesting abilities and a good weapon type, and they have the bone keyword, but their strength really holds them back. These are both in a crafting location where strength should be a minimum 4, and for some reason they have 3. But with this kind of build here, we've got 4 green affinities, so we've got our classic leather online, and when we start the showdown we chug our power potion and we get +4 strength tokens. Boom. Both of these now are strength 7 baseline, and you've got whatever extra survivor strength you have on top of that, which is really good. And believe you me, the Whistling Mace, if you've not played with it, it's actually very strong as an active form of proactive form of monster control. So I promised this one in the Gorm Chemist video, and here it is. There are other power potion builds available, but we'll talk about those when we talk about survivors who eschew and avoid armor sets in exchange for other powerful abilities. So that's our 4 builds. We will just wrap it up nicely with a quick summary here. The Gormery is a fantastic crafting location. The armor set is a little expensive for what you get on the armor points front, but it compensates for that with its slot compression, its upgradability, and its synergies with shields. It has an interesting and unique playstyle, which is a little high risk because you need to be taking severe injuries, but that may be your jam. On the weapon front, everything, with the exception of the Gaxe, is really, really good. And the Gaxe only doesn't look as good because in comparison to the greater Gaxe, it's sort of in a weird spot. All of the items available here are fantastic. Obviously the Gorn will drop in value when it is updated and ratted to have the noisy keyword that it's clearly supposed to have. But you can use armor spikes instead in all of those slots. The Pulse Lantern is incredible in the early game, and while it does fall off against indomitable monsters, it still does have value, especially in People of the Lantern campaigns where lanterns matter as well. So this is a bunch of reasons, along with the Gorm Chemist, as to why the Gormery should be one of your first things that you get unlocked, and why the Gorm, this ugly, terrifying, angry little baby, is something that you should be buying once you're looking to expand beyond the core game experience, because this stuff not only can replace the White Lion, but it also complements the White Lion, and it complements Spidiculus. Phenomenally good location, and this is the first expansion I got, and it's such a high note. So with all of that said, thank you so much for listening, and until next time, happy hunting.